continuing with the theme of Havdalah.
Dedicate the shir to your mom and the other, your mom.
A dedication of the shir is for Shifra Simcha Bat Yeta, for Refuah Shlema for Simcha Bat Yeta, all Cholim of Klal Yisrael, and for a swift termination of our enemies and defeat of the enemies of Klal Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael, and Medinat Yisrael.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay, so background to the 39 Malachas. We finished with Havdalah.
Okay.
Okay, there's one more thing just about Havdalah. There's three. So I'll just give two sources here. Actually, one source. Three of those who inherit the world to come are one who lives in the land of Israel, one who rears his children to the study of Torah, and one who recites Havdalah over wine, and that comes from Pesachim. Why does Havdalah recited over wine have equal importance? The Talmud refers to one who has only a little wine, which he reserves for Havdalah after Kiddush. By depriving oneself of immediate enjoyment of one's wine and preparing in advance for another mitzvah, one demonstrates one's eagerness to serve the Creator. So I didn't know that. Did you know that, Damon?
I did not know that.
Havdalah. So, okay, let me just go over the last point because I don't want to start the Malach. That's a new paragraph, a new chapter now. If one forgot to recite Havdalah, it may still be recited until sunset on Tuesday, but without blessings for the spices and the flame. I didn't know that. I wasn't aware of that. Children who are not awake for Havdalah at the termination of Shabbos are not required to recite it afterwards.
Okay.
So let me rather start the 30 Malachas next time. Otherwise, okay. So if you forget to do Havdalah, you have until Tuesday evening, Tuesday nightfall, Damon, or Tuesday during the day?
For what?
To do Havdalah if you forgot to do it Motzei Shabbos and Sunday, Monday.
I know it's Tuesday, but I don't know until when. I'm not sure.
It's only on the wine. No, not the spices and the flame. It's like
Correct.
if your Yontif ends during the week. Motzei Yontif, like Shavuot's going to end on a Tuesday night, so your Havdalah will only be on wine.
Correct.
Because you'll have done the wine and the spices and the flame of Motzei Shabbos.
Correct.
2 nights time.
Okay. So with that being said, Kevin, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Pleasure. All right. So let me just tell you where we left off. What was nice about Gavin yesterday is he cleared up some issues, because when you ask insightful questions, you go within a hair's breadth of definition, which is good. So what the discussion was at the end of the day is this issue of certainty of not being able to let go of outcome means that if you want the max, you've automatically relinquished rights to lesser things. And what we said, it wasn't about wheat or barley or contrasting objects. What it's about is value of money. So one of the classical examples are currency. Even when you're dealing within the same currency, let's not even take dollars and Zimbabwean dollars, because there you might be talking about wheat and barley. Even within that same currency, there are often court cases in terms of future trading and when you buy it at a certain forex rate, etc., because that makes a difference in terms of what you perceive you're going to get compared to what you're going to get. So all we said, bottom line, is according to Rabbi Barnasa, the case of it is if you were adamant that you want to grab the most, then you've already let go of accepting a less than favorable response. So then the onus is on you to bring evidence, and if you can't prove your case, you walk away with nothing. If you say that, listen, maybe the damage is correct, I don't know if it's the maximum, it's probably more likely because it's mu'at, and you can come to some sort of arrangement, either halfway in the middle, as Sumcho says, or if not, at the very least, get what the damager suggested, being Tam, or the smaller ox, because you haven't relinquished that position. You just say it's possible that it could be a higher position. So with that, we're going to go into discussion with regards to Rav Papa. So the Gemara answers that Brisa refers to, so basically, Give me a second, guys. Okay. So this implies that if the damage, okay, so while the damager says not so, rather that Tom did damage. Okay, so in both these cases, the burden of proof rests upon the one who seeks to exact money from his fellow. This implies that if the damaged party does not bring proof, he takes as much as the damager says, but that's only if he doesn't relinquish his position and is prepared to negotiate with the damager and be reasonable. Shall we say this is a refutation of Rabba bar Nasa, who said that if a plaintiff claimed wheat from him and the defendant admitted owing him barley, is exempt from paying even barley? Rather, to reconcile Rabba bar Nasa's ruling with the Mishnah, you must say that the Mishnah refers in a case in which the litigants say certainly, certainly, and perhaps, contrary to Rav Chia bar Abba's understanding. Okay? So just Arthur in summary, because I know you were exhausted yesterday. So what happens is, let me just look at my notes, is the reason why he is exempt from paying even barley is because the plaintiff, in other words, the one is suing for the damage, by claiming wheat, Arthur is in effect saying that I didn't give you barley. So he's forgiven any debt of barley. That's what Rashi says. Similarly, when the damaged party in our Mishnah claims with certainty that a Muad ox did the damage, he's in fact saying that the Tam did not do the damage, thus in effect forgiving all claims on the Tam. That was the answer to Gavin's question in summary.
And Dave's, like I said yesterday, to help you guys understand the difference between wheat and barley, it's like you borrowing $100,000 and offer as US dollars, and then offering to you back 50,000 Zimbabwean dollars. You know, it's a different currency.
Yeah,
it's not what he had. Or even if you give 100,000 Zimbabwean dollars, not he wants what he borrowed you because of the higher value. And he's not going to go for the lesser value because his mind's set on the higher one. Like you mentioned, the guy's Bava Kamma as well, or what else, or whatever it was in South Africa, where the guy went for, he wanted 10 billion instead of 48 million or something.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so exactly as Arthur said. So we're on page 35b3. The Gemara challenges Rav Papa's position that the Mishnah is discussing a claim of certainly and perhaps. Okay, so why did, Gavin, I want to ask you a question. Why did Rav Papa discuss a case of certainly and perhaps in one sentence?
I didn't discuss it because
why did he say the Mishnah mimics that initial case in 48b with Sumchus and the rabbis, where that was a case of inherent doubt, at which it was perhaps, and this is certainty and perhaps, but it can't be certainty and certainty, or certainly and certainly, depending on how you define it.
So what's your question?
Why does Rav Papa hold the word certainly and perhaps? Why does he say both?
Because if you're certain about something, but you want to get some money out of it, you need to go with the maybe the perhaps.
Correct. Perfect answer. Perfect answer. So he was saying the minute the Gemara is posing a question, certainly and certainly, you're going to come away with nothing unless there's proof. That's exactly it, Gavin, spot on. The Gemara challenges Rav Papa's position that the Mishnah is discussing a case of claims of certainly and perhaps. Who is the one saying certainly and who is the one saying perhaps? If we say that the damaged party is saying certainly and the damager is saying perhaps, we would still have to say this is a refutation of Rabba bar Nasa. The reason why it's a refutation is if the damaged party is adamant and certain, then it's, and we're saying here that at the end of the day, if he doesn't bring any evidence, he has to settle for what the damager is claiming. That's not a case of Rabba bar Nasan, it's a refutation because he's certain. And if he's that certain, then it's a case where he's relinquished almost rights to the less amount because in his mind he doesn't deserve less. So that's why, exactly as Gavin says, that this would appear to be a refutation of Rabba bar Nasan. So when we're saying certainly and perhaps, we can't say then that the damaged party is the certain party, can we? We have to say that the damager is certain, not the damaged party. That's what the Gemara is saying.
The damager isn't really certain either. I mean, he's
he's claiming certainty. You're right. You're 100% right. But he's adamantly claiming, no, it was my time ox. No, it was.
Right.
So we're saying that it's not a refutation of Rabba Bar Nassan if the damaged party, if the damager is certain, but only if the damaged party is certain, because then he has to bring evidence. Okay. So then the Gemara says, okay, so if we say that the damaged party is saying certainly and the damager is saying perhaps, we would still have to say this is a refutation of Rabba Bar Nassan. Rather, you must say that the Mishnah speaks of a case where the damaged, injured party is saying perhaps, and the damager is saying certainly. If so, however, since the latter part of the Mishnah is discussing a case where the damaged party is saying perhaps, and the damager is saying certainly, the first part of the Mishnah must also be discussing a case where the damaged party is saying perhaps your ox did the damage, and the damager is saying with certainty your ox injured himself against a rock. But did Tzumkos then say, even in this case, that the disputed money must be divided, so that it was necessary for the Mishnah to inform us that Tzumkos's colleagues disagree and say that it is not so? Certainly not. Thus, there's no way to explain all the cases of the Mishnah to be speaking of a situation in which the one litigant says certainly and the other one says perhaps. So what this actually means in simple language is, since the plaintiff, the person that's suing, is not disputing the defendant's assertion of non-liability, because he admits he doesn't know whether his ox was damaged by the pursuing ox or rock, how can Tzumkos possibly consider this a case of money that lies in doubt, in which the litigants divide the disputed money without a definite claim to contradict the defendant's certain denial? There's surely no basis for forcing the defendant to pay half the claim. So, guys, do you understand what this argument is? The counter argument to the fact that we're saying perhaps, or do you want me to explain it again in a simple way?
I think I've got it. But
Can you explain to me? I mean, I understand what you're saying. I'm confused about the perhaps and the other way you're saying it. It's just not settling in. Maybe just like
all right. So I'm going to explain two parts. The first thing, Yaakov,
does perhaps mean a possibility. Maybe
Yeah.
that's what they mean.
Oh, is that what it means? A possibility. Okay.
That's what they.
Yes, yes.
I think they just
Okay.
think of it as a possibility. It just makes it much easier.
Yeah, but it's reversed.
It's possible. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, it's the case, Damon. Let me try and answer this a little bit, and then you can just expand on it. I think I've got it right. Is in this particular case, the damaged party is in doubt as opposed to being certain.
Okay.
And the damager is certain.
Correct.
So
Correct.
it's
But
different.
that there's a problem that's coming up now, and I'm going to discuss it. But before we do, Arthur, when they say the word, my ox certainly didn't damage your ox, that word that the Gemara used for certainly is actually a word of certainty.
Okay.
Meaning he's certain there was no damage.
Okay.
When it uses the word perhaps, it means the possibility lies. Yeah. So Kevin's dead on. But Gavin, there's a refutation here. And this is the problem. The Gemara is actually saying, I'm just going to read it again and then explain what we mean. There's a counter argument here. Guys, something keeps beeping on somebody's side. I don't know which side it's on.
It could be me. No, I'll put it on. Sorry, I'll put it on silent.
I'll
Sorry.
go to mute.
That's mine. No, it was mine. It's I'll put it on aircraft mode now. Messages
All right.
come. Okay.
So what we're saying is, Gavin, I'm going to read this, said in a very complicated way. Rather, you must say that the Mishnah is speaking of a case where the damaged party is saying perhaps, and the damager is saying certainly. But if so, this is the complication. However, since the latter part of the Mishnah is discussing a case where the damaged party is saying perhaps, in other words, Arthur, there's a possibility, and the damager is saying certainly, meaning with certainty, right? The first part of the Mishnah is also discussing a case where the damaged party is saying perhaps your ox did the damage, and the damager is saying with certainty your ox injured himself against a rock. But did Sumchus say this even in the case that the disputed money is divided, so that it was necessary for the Mishnah to inform us that Sumchus's colleagues disagree and say that this is not so? Certainly not. There's no way to explain all the cases of the Mishnah to be speaking of a situation in which one litigant says certainly and the other says perhaps. So Gavin, let me just explain to you what this means in English, right? This whole discussion now. What we're saying is as follows, right? Is that the plaintiff, the one who's suing, is not disputing the defendant's assertion of non-liability, okay? Because he admits he doesn't know whether his ox was damaged by the pursuing ox or the rock. So how can Sumchus consider the case of money that lies in doubt, in which the litigants divide the disputed money? Because without a definite claim to contradict the defendant's certain denial, there's no basis for forcing the defendant to pay half the claim. So this is what they're actually saying, is that, Gavin, in order for you to win a court case, there has to be a disputing party that doesn't agree with the defendant. So if you damage my ox, and I say, well, yeah, perhaps it did injure itself against a rock, then there's no court case. That's what the Mishnah is saying. It doesn't have a problem with the second part of the Mishnah. The second part, they're still fighting, but they're open to it, but they're still saying, you owe me some money. You owe me money. I think you owe me money because your ox is muad, and you think me owe me money tam. But I'm not saying that I'm giving up on the tam claim, because I think it was more probable that it was muad, but I'm not 100% sure. But they're still fighting over money. When there's a case of perhaps and certainly, there's no fight, because we're not dealing with the amount of money. We're dealing with either you pay or you don't. In other words, you're saying, Gavin, definitely that your ox pursuing mine never injured my ox. My ox damaged itself against a rock. And I'm saying perhaps it did, or perhaps your ox actually did kicking of it, which is a tall day of carrying. So then, unless I'm sure, there's no court case, because we're not disputing money. Either you're liable or you're not. That's the contradiction to this. Not in the second part of the Mishnah, where we're still disputing the amount of money, but we're discussing in the first part of the Mishnah either non-liability or liability. How can there be even a case if I'm not sure that you even owe me money? That's the counter argument. Do you get the issue? All right, guys, can you tell me what the issue is? I just want to see if you've understood it. Any of you? Yeah?
I'll give it a shot, but I'm not 100%. It's quite tricky. So what's happening here is that because the damaged party is unsure about everything, he doesn't really. There's no real claim. The one guy's certain. The damage is certain that it was the tomahawks.
No.
What's that?
Sorry, mate. I love to give it to you when you're not off, but you're off now. So what we're saying is the second part of the Mishnah, there's no problem. Because if Kevin and I are fighting and I say to him, your Muad ox did the damage because it's more likely because it's aggressive and your other thing hasn't got a track record. He said, not at all, my tum did it. And I say it's more likely, but I haven't said for sure. I said it's possible, it's probably more likely. Then we're still fighting over money. The only difference of the money we're fighting over is either half payment or full payment. So there's no issue there. Same as small ox and large ox. The Gemara doesn't have a problem with Rav Papas, perhaps and certainly, in the second part of the Mishnah, because we're still having a fight about money, either half money or full money. The problem is the first part of the Mishnah, which means if your ox, Gavin, didn't damage if I, as the damaged party, saying maybe your ox damaged my ox, or maybe it got damaged by a rock, then if I'm not sure, how can I even have a case? Because you're either liable or you're not liable. It's not like we're arguing over money. So if I'm not convinced, how do we even have a court case? Never mind split it in half.
Yeah, okay, I've got it. Want me to explain it?
Okay. I'd love you to.
Okay, so basically, in a case like that example, if there's no monetary arguments and it doesn't really, if the actual case involved is purely about, in this particular case, where the animal brushes against the side, whether he brushed against the side or not, if the damager said that on the damaged side he's unsure, there's no monetary value in this particular example. Whereby in the other cases there was a dispute on monetary value. Yeah, there's no dispute on monetary value. Yeah, we're not even sure if the animal even hit the rock or even got damaged. So because the damaged party is completely unsure, there's no real case here. Is that right?
Yeah, I think you understand
I'm not sure if I'm explaining to the best. You obviously explained it better.
Let's do it in one sentence. What we're saying is in the latter, Kevin, let me do it in one sentence for you. In the latter part of the Mishnah, you and I are arguing over amounts of money, but I'm dead sure that your ox scored my ox. That I'm absolutely sure of. So either you owe me half payment if it's tam or full payment if it's muad. We still have a court case of money. In the first part of the Mishnah, if I'm not sure if my ox got damaged by your ox kicking my ox, or in fact it got damaged by a rock, either there's a legal case of liability or there's non-liability and there's no legal case. How can I, as the plaintiff trying to sue you, be unsure? Otherwise, there's no case. It's not like we're arguing on unsure of how much money. Either you damaged me or you didn't. It's very straightforward. So Rav Papa's answer is this, okay, to that question. No, Rav Papa says, it's indeed possible to explain the Mishnah in this manner. How so? The latter part of the Mishnah speaks of a case in which the damaged party says, perhaps, meaning Arthur, there's a possibility and probably likely that your muad ox attacked my ox instead of the tam because of its habitual nature. I'm just giving an example. And the damager says certainly. And the damager says, no, I'm absolutely certain it was my tam ox that attacked your ox. But whereas the first part of the Mishnah speaks of a case in which the damaged party says certainly, and the damager says perhaps. Okay, so what Rav Papa is saying here is that it still has to be a case of certainly and perhaps. But in the first part of the Mishnah, the damaged party is absolutely sure that damager's ox hit his ox. Okay, and if the and then the damager, the one is not sure, he can't be sure. He said perhaps it might have injured itself in a rock. So it reverses the position in the first part of the Mishnah that the damaged party is certain, and the damager is saying maybe possibly it hit itself against a rock. Okay. But in the second part of the Mishnah, it's the damaged party that says, look, I think it was muad, probably likely, but I'm not relinquishing time because either way your ox damaged my ox. And then the damager says, no, it was my tam ox that injured your ox. It was my smaller ox that gored your larger ox. You get what I'm saying? So he's saying, as long as the Mishnah is consistent where it has the word certainly and perhaps, it doesn't matter which order. So then the Gemara argues with Rav Papa, and it says the following. The Gemara questions Rav Papa, but according to what you have just said in the case of the first part of the Mishnah, is not parallel to the last case of the Mishnah. Since you're forced to concede that different parts of the Mishnah are speaking about different situations, why did you refute Rav Chia bar Abba's assertion that the beginning of the Mishnah refers to a case of certainly and certainly, on the grounds that the latter part of the Mishnah would have to parallel it and cannot? Say, according to Rav Chia bar Abba as well, that the first part of the Mishnah discusses the case of certainly and certainly, and the latter part of the part discusses a case of certainly and perhaps. So what it's saying is, listen, you can't have it both ways. There has to be parallel. According to Rav Chia bar Abba, it's a case of certainly and certainly, which you can interchange after with certainty and certainty. I prefer that word because the guy said, I'm certainly sure it's your ox, but let's say that the concept behind it is certainty. So Rav Chia bar Abba said it's a case of certainty and certainty throughout both parts of the Mishnah. And it's saying, well, Rav Papa can't argue with Rav Chia Bar Abba because you can't say certainly and perhaps and certainly and switch it around. It's not consistent. You have to be consistent throughout the Mishnah. So either say certainly and certainly, or perhaps and certainly in the first and the last. So it's saying be consistent. So this is Rav Papa's answer to that. Rav Papa said, I will say to you that certainly and perhaps and certainly are one thing. In other words, one type of situation. Therefore, explaining the two cases of the Mishnah to be speaking of such a situation is not problematic, even though we must say in one case that it's the plaintiff who is certain, and in the other case it's the defendant. However, certainly and perhaps and certainly are two entirely different things. Therefore, since the latter part of the Mishnah must be discussing claims of perhaps and certainly, or as Arthur and I prefer to say, the possibility and certainty. You cannot explain the first part to be discussing claims of certainty and certainty. So what it's saying is as follows, is Rav Papa saying, no, we can't have the first part of the Mishnah where you saying, I must say certainty and certainty, and then afterwards perhaps uncertainty. That doesn't gel, that doesn't parallel. But it's still one situation if you say that one party is certain and the other one is open to possibilities. And it doesn't matter if the order switches itself from the plaintiff to the defendant in terms of who is certain in the first part of the brisa, the Mishnah, to the second part, because they still mimic each other. If one party is certain and the other one is not sure, it doesn't matter if those roles reverse, as long as it's open to the fact that it's consistent between it of certainty and doubt. So he says it does parallel. It doesn't have to be where the plaintiff is certain in both cases or is in doubt in both cases. He said it's far more consistent to do that than the problematic saying certainty and certainty compared to possibilities and certainty. Does that make sense? And Rav Papa's right. Guys, do you understand what I'm saying? Arthur, please, with that cat.
I never complain about your cat when it does stuff.
Yeah, but Arthur, it's not this all the time. It's not making my hair do.
I don't have any hair for him to do, so that's cool.
That's true. So, Gavin, do you want to explain what I'm saying? So I see you understand it. Or Arthur, you go for it.
Okay, so I'm blank at the moment. Let me see if I can get it together. Bruce, skip me, please.
Gary.
I can't even think now. I mean, I understand the possibility and certainty. I understand those two. I understand that it's the two rabbis and remembering the names.
Short put.
Where did Gavin go?
Yeah, sorry.
Oh.
Damon.
Gavin, he was asking you a question.
At the end of the day, there's got to be proof. There's got to be proof, and so the people, if someone is certain, then they obviously want to get there as much damage or as much restitution as possible. That's why they're saying that. That's why. But it has to be proved at the end of the day. It has to. It is as we discussed yesterday or the day before. It has to be proven. So people can talk about it till the cows come home. If it's certain, it's certainty, or if it's perhaps. End of the day, there has to be proof.
So what it's saying is as follows. That's not the issue at hand, because the issue at hand is that the Mishnah has to be consistent in the first and last part. So what's happening here is the first part of the argument is, look, if Rav Papa is saying that there's a case in the first part of the Mishnah where the plaintiff is uncertain whether his ox was damaged by the other person's ox or rock, there's no court case. So what are you talking about? That in the first case, there's no problem. In the second case, sorry, in the first case, that is a problem. In the second case, it's not, because I can still sue you and say you owe me money because it's clear your ox gored my ox. The amount of money is in question. Was it time that you owe me half, or do you owe me full? So if I'm prepared to negotiate and say, look, neither of us know, maybe we can meet at three-quarter damages or something along those sort of lines. That's what Sumchus is talking about. But in a case, what do you do in a case where the person is certain? Then he relinquishes any right, and then he has to bring evidence. And that is correct. It doesn't mean both sides of the Mishnah have to be consistent as long as they're parallel, meaning one of the parties is certain and one of the parties thinks it's a possibility. So so the Gemara is saying, hang on a second, that's a problem. So why did Rav Papa argue with Rav Chia bar Abba? Because Rav Chia bar Abba is consistent. He's saying it's a case of certainty with both the defendant and the plaintiff in both the first part of the Mishnah and last part of the Mishnah, but Rav Papa is switching, because in the first part of the Mishnah, the damaged party is certain that the attacking ox damaged his ox, whereas the person that owns the attacking ox says, well, maybe it injured itself against the rock. So in the first case of the Mishnah with the rock and the ox, the damager is giving a possibility that ox could have been damaged by a rock and not from his ox. Okay. So in that case, the plaintiff, the damaged party, is suing the damager and saying, I'm certain your ox did the damage to my ox. In the second case, he's saying, look, I'm not relinquishing my rights to half payment damage. I'm just saying it's more likely that based on your ox being moored and damaging many times before, it's more likely that it's moored, but I'm not 100% sure. So in the second part of the Mishnah, we're saying that the damaged party says it's a possibility it was moored, probably likely. And the damager is saying, no, it was my time, the ox said. So the Gemara is saying that's inconsistent. Rav Papa is saying it's not inconsistent. As long as both cases have a consistency where the one party is certain and the other one says it's a possibility, it doesn't matter if the plaintiff and defendant switch. It's still consistent. It's much more consistent than me having a case of certainty of both the plaintiff and the defendant in the case of the ox and the rock. And in the second case, with the tam and muad and small and large ox, saying there's a case of possibility and certainty. Okay, he said that's far more inconsistent.
Let me see if I've got this. Okay.
Sure.
In the first case, if either one is, if the first guy is certain, the other guy's thinking it could be a possibility, that's okay. If the first is again the other way around, is if the first guy's thinking it's a possibility, the other guy's certain, that's also okay. It's only when both of them are certain that the one did the damage and the one didn't do the damage, it was a rock, that the problem comes in. We lose his right. Is that what you're trying to say?
More than that, but at least you got some of it. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So Gavin, can you say it over? Because in other words, all Rav Papa is saying is certainly and perhaps even with certainty and possibilities are, even when the roles reverse, is consistent as the first and last part of the Mishnah compared to certainty and certainty versus possibilities and certainty. That's what he's saying. Those are two different things, but the role reversal of who's certain and who is open to possibility doesn't matter if the plaintiff and defendant switch roles, as long as it's consistent in terms of that both parties are not certain. That's all he's saying. What, Gavin, do you want to explain it in like simpler terms? I'm open.
I don't have it 100%, but I'll give it a shot. So this is what I think is going on. So in the first case, you're dealing with certainty and certainty. No, you're dealing with certainty. Yeah, certainty and certainty, because both guys, the one reckons that his ox was gored or pushed by the other ox, and the damaged party and the damager claims that no, your ox bumped himself on the rock. So both are
According
certain.
to whose opinion?
So it's
Because
according
that's
to
not
Achib. What's his name? Achiba. What's his name?
Rav Chia bar Papa. Yeah, no, Rav Chia bar Abba.
I was close. Here, that's the one I want. Okay. So Rabbi Chia says that. Then what happens in the second half of the Mishnah is you get a scenario where it's certainty and doubt and uncertain. So in that particular case, it doesn't make a difference if the certainty comes from the damaged party or and the doubt comes from the damager, or the roles are or the other way around.
No, it does. It does. It does.
I'm just saying what you said. This is what you said.
No, that's not what I said. Let me explain what I said. It's what you understood.
No, I didn't understand it 100%. I'm going according to what you said because that was easier for me.
Okay.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought you said.
No. So what I'm saying is as follows.
I have to read this to really get this. Is quite
all right,
tricky.
but well, that's what Chazor is for. So let me just explain to you what I mean. With the case of Rav Chia bar Abba, he's saying it's a case of certainty and certainty, right? The reason he's saying that is because both parties are arguing with each other. And he was saying Rav Mamal bar Abba had this whole conversation with Rav Chia bar Abba and saying, really, does Sumchus agree in this situation? Because the one in 48b is a case of inherent doubt. How can this Mishnah parallel when you are saying both are certainly and certainly? In other words, two cases of certainty. So he was asking in amazement. That's what the Gemara said. So he was saying, yes, it is. Both parties are adamant. But he's saying, well, then what about this rule of Rabba bar Nassan? Because the minute Rav Papa in the end turns around and says, listen, if the damaged party can't prove it, he takes, we get paid according to the damager's word. And he's saying that's a contradiction of Rabba bar Nassan, because the fact of it, if it's that certain, he's given up the claim of the lesser amount. So that would be a refutation of Rabba bar Nassan. And then we clear up and we say, no, Rav Papa wasn't the one that said certainties on both sides. He's saying certainty and perhaps, because it's not a refutation of Rabba bar Nassan. Rav Chia bar Abba is a refutation of Rabba bar Nassan. You get what I'm saying? If you're holding by Rabba, if you're holding a case where they split the difference, where you can't hold that, because then the onus becomes on the damaged party to furnish proof, because he's given up his lesser claim. Now that he wants the full claim, he has to prove it. So what we're saying in a nutshell is the Gemara comes across and says, look, it doesn't understand the inconsistency, because